Chapter 8, Bhagavad Gita. There are some things that we have to be clear about as we read on. For example, why is it that when a father and son are playing with the balloon and the balloon bursts as it will, why is it that the father does not feel the kind of dejection and devastation that a child does for the same event, the bursting of the balloon? Well, all of us, because we have outgrown the playing with toys and with balloons, we can understand it and we say, why? The logic is so simple. What is there to explain about it? We know that it is the nature of the balloon to burst because it is so ephemeral, so transient, so fleeting. That's the very nature of the balloon. But does the child know that? No. And therefore he is devastated. But what about us? Bhagwan has been saying to us that this world of ours, which is the Maya world of material, of matter, Panchatattva matter, including our bodies, which is also part of the matter world, we are all like a bubble. And this bubble has the nature of bursting at some point or the other. The thing is that neither the child there, because he is so busy enjoying with it, and he has a notion fixed in his mind that this balloon is going to give me joy, as it is giving me joy now. No doubt it is giving him joy, but it will continue to give me joy forever. That notion he has fixed in his mind, and therefore the bursting of the balloon is a devastating, sorrow-giving event for him. For us, Krishna looks at us as exactly the same kind of children, very childish minds. He's saying, can't you see that this world of matter is a bubble? And it will go into pralaya when the world has contracted and collapsed into one black hole. That is pralaya. The world of matter only, not consciousness, mind you. The world of matter will disappear. And what about our daily lives? Yes, everything in our daily lives is also appearing and disappearing. For example, our dreams. So there are very solid people and places and events, very solid looking, which appear in our dreams. Where does the solidity come from? It comes from our mind, it plays on the mind, and it disappears in the mind. That samashti is the total mind, is of the same nature, where everything is appearing on the substratum and playing on the substratum, appearing as solid as the people and events in the dream. This world for Bhagwan is appearing like that, and it will disappear upon God's awakening. So waking and sleeping has been compared to pralaya and prabhava. Creation and dissolution is a continuous cycle, just like dream and sleep for us. What about the other things of matter in this world? Yes, we see them disappearing. I can see that the house needs maintenance, and after 40 years it will disintegrate or be demolished. Will need demolition because it will be in such bad shape. And my car is certainly going for scrap. All the things, and my body is also getting ready for some kind of treatment. All the time it needs a lot of maintenance and treatment and hospital and pills, and because it is not immune to disintegration. So Bhagwan says, just like the entire universe, every little thing around you with different durations, everything is as ephemeral as that bursting balloon, which is the nature of sansar. And the nature of sansar is such. So why is Arjun grieving? Oh, Bhishma Pitama, he is my great grandsire, he will pass away. And what about Dronacharya and my teachers, my beloved cousins? Some of them are beloved, not all. What will happen to them? Now, what is Arjun grieving about? Let's be very clear. He is not grieving their passing away. He is grieving the cessation, the stopping of the joy that he will not receive anymore, the seizing of the joy that he gets from those relationships. So if my house and my car and my relatives and my spouse and my children and grandchildren, if they give me a certain kind of security and comfort and a certain identity and feeling of worth, I continue to derive that joy and identity and self-worth from all those things. And then when any of these things are gone, I dread it. For me, that is equivalent to sorrow. So Bhagavan is saying, what you are sorrowing about is not that anyone in your life will go away, but what you derive from them will be gone. Okay, so how many millions of lives have we lived before? So many of them. And in each one of these lives, we have jogged to keep healthy, and we have had spouses and children and relationships, and we have cried and laughed with our families. Every life has a different family, and we may have been born as humans or non-humans, depending on our prarabdha. But we have cried and laughed, and now where are they? Where are all of them? Nowhere. In the sense, they are not even in our memory. Even our memory of those relationships has been erased by the way the world is designed. It's not designed for us to carry on our memory to the next life. Therefore, we have tasted success, we have suffered failures, all those lives, and today we don't have any memory of it. So therefore, everything is gone as it is meant to be. We are only Vyakta. We are Vyakta, manifest for this brief period, and we will go back into Avyakta, just as all our dream people and situations go back into unmanifest. But what does go forward? Yes, there is one thing that does go forward, that is our spiritual progress. Spiritual progress means nothing more than realizing who we are, pure consciousness. And what is the nature of that Param Brahma? Same, pure consciousness. The more and more we lead our lives closer and closer to that truth. We know it intellectually now, but hearing it all the time, thinking about it, contemplating brings us closer. That is called spiritual evolution. That evolution of our spiritual life is the only purpose. Otherwise, why would we be here? Just to collect more things, collect more relationships, and then see them all destroyed? No, that would be such a meaningless exercise. So Bhagavan says in the 8th chapter, 5th verse, Antakale cha mameva smaran muktva kalevaran. Those who have recognized the futility of this kind of lascivious, let me say, material, comfort-seeking, luxury-seeking, pleasure-seeking life, those who have realized that it is actually futile, they are the people who start aspiring for a release. I want to be released from this thraldom of the flesh. Why am I so tempted by this or that? As a natural course of living, I may enjoy everything because my families are visiting this place or that, or they're coming over and we have a nice meal and get together. Everything in the natural course of events in sansar is fine. And we have to keep repeating that we are in the grip of a pleasure-seeking world only when our happiness and joy depends only on those things, which means it is the emotional dependence which is the issue, not the actual living in the sansar of relationships and vyakti and people and relatives and children and shopping, yes, not to forget, and all that joy definitely is there. Just like the child is deriving some great joy and happiness at that moment. But can that child at the moment of playing remember that okay, it's okay if it bursts, I'll play with it while it is still up in the air and it is filled with air, I will play with it. But does he have the spiritual maturity? Does that child have the spiritual maturity to keep in mind at the same time of enjoyment that it's okay, everything will pass, this joy will pass, that sorrow will also pass? Yeah, agama payino anityaha. And when he, suppose that child has that maturity, he doesn't, just like we don't have the maturity to live in this world, we also delve in sorrow and excitement and extravagance. If that child was to remember, oh, it's okay, if it bursts, it's okay, but right now I'm just enjoying it because it's there. In the same way, in a natural course of events, I will experience things around me and experience the joy of everything because everything is joyous. My nature is joyous. That's why we can seek joy in everything. But The dependence on it is gone. That is the whole point. The emotional dependence, if this is gone, I am shattered. So the yogis and sannyasis, what happens, doesn't mean that they don't suffer sorrow. Don't get me wrong. They do have little shocks in life. They are human beings after all. But you know how fast they bounce back from it? By reminding themselves. How do they bounce back from sorrow of any kind? The sorrow could be, it could be of the Adi-Daivik kind, which means of the natural disasters. It could be of the Adi-Bhautik kind, which is the sorrow given to us from people and vastu and objects and circumstances and environment around us, Bhautik. And the third sorrow, which is the most devious of all, is the Adhyatmic, which is our own mind, which dwells in raga, dvesha, attachments and hatred and disdain and distaste of this or that. My likes and dislikes are causing me sorrow. So all three, the natural disasters, the environment and my own mind, all three at some point are capable of bringing sorrow to me. The yogi and sannyasi simply just distances himself and says, okay, I understand this is the sorrow of the Bhautik world or Adi-Daivik world, or my own mind is playing mischief. I'm okay. My true nature is, always is and will be pure consciousness, and the nature of consciousness is Satchit Anand. Anand, our joy, is that reminder, that small reminder is what he uses as his tool to bounce back into life and to loosen his dependence on relationships and situations and people for his joy. It cannot be, because consciousness is totally independent, totally free, totally unchanging. How can it be dependent on whether the maid has come today? Oh, I am upset. Whether the salary I received was inadequate. Oh, I am upset. How can money, which is just matter, how can people who are working and helping and supporting my household work, how can they bring sorrow into my life? Yes, but we still find ourselves complaining about the taxes in our country, about the potholes outside, about the diseases we or our relatives suffer. Yes, we complain because we forget that one fact: the world of matter has the nature of decay, disease, disintegration. It's just a small reminder, nothing else, just a small reminder. So this reminder keeps us afloat, keeps our head above water, so that we don't drown in the sansar and then are tossed about by its joys and sorrows. That gives us stability, gives us equanimity, gives us a kind of poise, equanimous poise and shanti. So what do we do with that equanimous poise? Okay, it's important because it's only in that silence that God will reveal himself. In the bhakti language, God will reveal himself. In the Gyan Margi language, we will realize that consciousness is the only unchanging existence in me, around me and everywhere. Without that silence, there is too much noise and too much activity and too much busyness. In that busyness, how can we even hope to have a glimpse of the ultimate? So first and foremost, we need to draw ourselves away, find our silent spot in our own minds, find our little silent corner inside of us, in our own heads, and then you will see the revelation. You will see the revelation. It's not as if when I open the window, I look out and then I peep here and there and up and down and say, where's the sunlight? It's not like that. The moment I open the window, sunlight comes streaming in. It's always there. So, what is our obstacle then? What's our problem? There's no obstacle. It's only our inability to withdraw from the world of matter. In the mind, I'm saying, not in actuality. Actually, we have to function in the world. We have to complete all our duties. Mentally, we have no ability to, or let's say we have not been trained like the yogis, the sannyasis. We have not been trained sufficiently to mentally withdraw from the world of matter, or to realize that, oh, matter, it's anitya, it is like a bubble. The bubble is meant to burst. But then every time it bursts, I'm weeping and wailing and thrashing about like a spoiled child. That's what I do in this sansar. So the secret is, how do I fulfill so many desires that are cropping up all the time in my head? Okay, so in the natural course of the way life is ordered for me, if they come to me, well and fine. I will make a certain attempt and then leave the rest to God. But I'm not going to hanker and get anxious about it and obsess about it. This obsession, anxiety, and the hankering is going to make me lose my control over my own balance and equanimity of my mind. Let things come to me. What is the one way to get over all the desires in the world, which may arise even in the future? The only one way to get over all the desires in the world is not to satisfy them. Yes, when they are satisfied, they may still hanker for more. For example, I have made a visit to Southeast Asia, and there was this beautiful, I'm just giving an example, I haven't been there. I haven't been on a cruise. So on the cruise, I have been to so many beautiful islands, and in the Pacific Ocean too, I have seen this great beauty. Okay, so at that moment I enjoyed it. And after 6 months or a year or 2 years, what do? I have a strange longing again, because that joy has faded. So satisfying the joy, the desires, is never the answer. It's never a final answer. It's never the ultimate answer, and we know it. So we stopped here when we said how to fulfill all our desires. A paradoxical sutra is, drop them all completely. Drop them from the mind. If they come to us, fine. If they don't come to us, I'm fine. I'm okay, because I'm already complete. I'm already fulfilled. So है हुस्न आरज़ू का एक राज. हुस्न आरज़ू, to complete all my desires, there is one secret, एक राज, और वो है तरके आरज़ू. Drop them all. Drop all the arzus. And therefore in the 15th verse, Bhagavan says, Mamupetya punarjanma dukkhalayam shashvatam. So you want to come back to this world, which is a world of pain and finitude. It is not infinite, it is just a finite world. Dukkhalaya, world of pain. Ashashvatam, in a finite world. You want to come back over and over? How many years? How many times? Millions of times? Bhagavan himself is saying, this is your world of Dukkhalaya Mashashvatam, Ashashvatam, finite world. And we saw in the 19th verse, Bhuta Grama Sevayam Bhutva Bhutva Praliyate. So the beings of a similar kind are born again and again and again in this world. Beings of a similar species will bring forth the beings of the same species. The same thing applies to thoughts. If my thoughts are of a certain kind, if they are of a sattvic kind, of generosity, of helping, of doing service in whatever field I am, then those sattvic thoughts will breed more of the same kind of thoughts. But if my mind is of a rajasic kind and ambitious and go-getter and start aiming for higher and higher salaries and higher job, climbing the corporate ladder and the social ladder, the economic ladder, there's so many ladders in the world to climb, not enough time. But yes, if I am rajasic, my mind or my thoughts will give rise or give birth to more and more of similar kinds of thoughts. The law of nature is as simple as that. So Bhutagramam, the multitude of lives, Bhutam, Bhutagramam Sevayam, Bhutva Bhutva, they arise again and again and again. And we are what we think. We become what we think over a course of time. So how can I disinherit? How can I disinherit all this baggage that I am carrying of my past thoughts? Okay, that is, just remember one thing, and that is, what is the platform, what is the adharam, the substratum on which all this drama is happening? That brings us to verse number 20, chapter 8, 20. परस्तस्मात् तु भावोऽन्यः अव्यक्तो व्यक्तान् सनातनः यः स सर्वेषु भूतेषु नश्यत्सु न विनश्यति. All the things which are manifest in this world, they will go into the unmanifest. And there is another unmanifest, the ultimate unmanifest, which is eternal, which is never destroyed, and that is the substratum of all the drama that is going on, our life. It's like a blackboard. So on the blackboard, we write so many things. The teacher in the morning comes in for her history class, and she writes down a whole lot of things about dynasties and wars. And then the next teacher who comes in rubs it all out. And then she says, oh, I'm the maths teacher, so I'm going to put triangles and quadrilateral triangles and formulae on the same board. And then the next teacher rubs it out again and again. And so the next teacher. So there are so many things written and erased and written and erased. But they are happening on the same consciousness substratum, the blackboard. Okay, but what about pralay? When all these heavenly bodies and the very universe, which is made up of matter anyway, and when it begins to contract after 43 lakh years, remember, in 2000, when it contracts and it collapses into the black hole or black matter or whatever, what about then? Is the blackboard still there? So, when there is no class going on, when the students have left, and when the teachers have left for the day, is the blackboard still there? Yes, it still remains. No teaching going on, blackboard still there. Teaching going on, blackboard still there. So, if our world of matter is existing, which means is in creation, yeah, consciousness is there. When there is no creation, which means dissolution, consciousness is still there. That is the ultimate reality which is indicated here. And therefore we have a repeated cycle of creation and dissolution and creation and dissolution, which has been compared to the night and day of Brahma's life. This is all allegorical. It is like a symbol. Okay, Brahma is that consciousness, and one night and one day, 43 lakh in 2000 years, one night. Okay. If that is not graspable, it's very hard to grasp this kind of magnitude in time and space by our small little minds, which are grasping small little matters in this life about मुझे क्या हुआ और पेट्रोल के दाम कितने बढ़ गए हैं, and why is my maid demanding a higher salary, why did my relative borrow money and not return. Oh, can you imagine the number of things which are crowding the mind, and they are of a minuscule scale, minuscule like particles of dust which are blowing about in the universe. We ourselves are of that scale of dust particles. Now, because of the scale of time and space is so vast, our small minds are not able to grasp it, and therefore one of the words used for that reality, that ultimate reality, is achintayan. Achintayam means inconceivable. We can't conceive it with our small mind. Okay, but how is it that somebody knows about it? How is it that the rishis have written about it if it can never be conceived? That is why we have to understand what is the quality of mind we have to cultivate. If not now, over thousands of years, what is that quality of mind we require to be able to conceive that vast reality, to expand it? Vivekananda ji used to say, in meditation, expand your mind towards infinity. One day it will touch infinity, and that is the ultimate reality. Because eternal and infinite, anitya, ashashvatam, is the description of that ultimate reality anyway. So you will touch it. That quality of mind has to be cultivated. So verse 21. Avyaktoksara ityuktah tamahuh paramam gatim yam prapya na nivartante tadhamam paramam mama tadhamam paramam mama. So that unmanifest, or that imperishable, let's call it that infinite, that is the highest goal. And therefore to reach it and never to return from it, That is our goal. That how is it that I can touch it and never return again? If that's the goal, Aksharam Brahma Paramam. In the third verse also Bhagavan had said, Aksharam cannot be destroyed. It cannot disappear. Can we touch that reality? Aksharam. And we were also advised in the 13th verse of this chapter, Omityekaksharam Brahma Vyaharan Mamanusmaran. Omityekaksharam. Can we use Om as the symbol of that imperishable and use that symbol to remind us, just the way people when they do Kirtanam, what they do in Kirtan is Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, and that Krishna figure or whatever they hold in their mind, that personified figure, God, or that sound, that figure or that idol in their mind, that is a reminder, nothing but a reminder. Yes, and therefore Om is also a symbol. It's a subtler symbol than a figure or a picture. Subtler symbol is Om. And to meditate on that symbol of Om imperishable is one of the ways which has been suggested. Now, we may say, how does it work? We don't know what was going on in the minds of the rishis, what they experienced, we don't know. So, with the same questions that are going on in our minds right now, there are many scientists in the world, in the US and Germany and also UK, who are trying to figure out what is it in mantra, what is that power and strength which is packed in any mantra, and especially the Gayatri mantra, which is supposed to be the Gayatri mantra, which is supposed to be a mantra with a tremendous amount of power and strength packed in it. Okay, so this is the claim of the rishis, the claim of the munis. But what about the scientists? So they set about trying to figure out what it is, and with all their empirical research in their laboratories, they found that when we chant a mantra, there is a kind of invocation. We want to invoke a certain quality or a certain grace upon us. That invocation happens to come true, believe it or not. It happens to come true if we believe in it completely. And they found with their instruments that the frequency, the syllables and sounds of Gayatri mantra have been juxtaposed in such a way that that there is 110,000 vibrations, that is hertz, 1.10 hertz, upon which that frequency of Gayatri mantra operates on that high frequency. How? That's what they found in the laboratory. Just 24 syllables. Om Bhur Bhuva Swaha Tatsavitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat. And they go on, and sometimes when we are doing havans, we do it for 100 or 1000 times. That has a certain power. That frequency of sound at 1.10 frequency hertz creates a certain vibration, and that vibration they have found out has the quality of carrying a certain positivity in the air, clearing the air of all negativity. And what we are invoking through the meaning of that mantra, any mantra. So in Gayatri mantra, what we are saying is, we are singing the glory of the creator and the universe, and we are saying, you creator, you are the embodiment of all the light and gyan, and may I have that gyan and light. That's all. This is the only invocation. May I have that ultimate light and gyan. Say it 1000 times with the meaning of it embedded in the mind, not mechanically, because because I may say Mercedes Benz 1000 times, 1001 times I may say Mercedes Benz, but will I get it? Will I get a new car? I will not. So mechanically is not what we are meant to do, but as an invocation. Your mind is saying, that creator, that ultimate reality of which I have no experience now, but I invoke your grace because you are the symbol of the highest light and gyan. Invoke that grace so I can be enlightened with the gyan. with each mantra you keep that meaning in your mind and the invocation comes true. It's a power-packed mantra. So now if scientists are also coming around to this truth, then we are tempted to believe that a whole lot of other truths that have been spoken in our ancient scriptures have also been equally researched or revealed by our ancient munis. So why should we wait for the Western empirical world to come out with their proofs and their judgments, and then we accept them? We don't have that much time. Sorry, we don't have that much time. We have to have Shraddha, and that's the meaning of Shraddha. To say, yes, I will follow the path in the scriptures because they have held the same power for thousands of years. So that's why we are told avyakto kshara, that which is called the unmanifest and imperishable, that should be our highest goal. That abode is, poetically it has been called Tad Dhamam Paramam Mam. It is my home. Krishna says, that's my home, you're coming to me. It's just a poetic way of saying. And the Bhakti Margis, and sometimes we love the Bhakti Marg because it personifies everything. It makes Krishna consciousness a real person, a real flesh and blood, which he is not. But that makes us identify and endear ourselves to Krishna. And Krishna says, yes, with open arms, come, Tad Dhamam Paramam Mam. That is my home. Come to my home, welcome. And I am waiting with open arms. And Paramam Gatim, that highest goal, if you keep in mind, you will come to me. Na nivartate. From there, sorry, I am going to shut the door, Krishna says. You will not return. Return where? Where Bhagwan has already described in the previous verse as your world of Dukkhalaya Ashashvatam, a world of pain and impermanence. Everything is impermanent. Everything. He's saying, in that impermanent world, you want to go? Krishna says, I am waiting with open arms. Just keep your mind on me. Okay, so it's like saying, if you want to go back to this home of Dukkhalaya Ashashvatam, it's like saying, if someone comes home, someone comes home, you say, अरे तुम यहाँ क्या कर रहे हो? वापस जेल में जाओ. तुम जेल से छूटे क्यों? या फिर हॉस्पिटल से कोई आता है ना, and after a long treatment, you say, हॉस्पिटल वापस जाओ, यहाँ क्यों आए हो? ऐसे तो हम नहीं कहते किसी से. So when we reach the Paramam Dham of Bhagwan, then is there any desire to come back to a prison or a hospital or this Dukkhalaya Ashashvatam? It is as ridiculous as that. So once we are home, we are home. For that, some conditions, the conditions apply, and conditions always apply. That is the fine print of every contract. And so in the 12th verse, I'm just going back a couple of verses. In the 12th verse, Bhagwan had made it very clear. He says, I would require something from you. Sarvadvarani samyamya manohridi nirudhya cha. If you are going to keep your mind and your heart wide open to the storms of temptations in this entire world, and there are so many, this whole shopping arcade of this sansar, and you are roaming around amok like a bull in a china shop. I want this, I want that, I want that. He says, if you are going to keep all this sarvadvar, dwar is all the gates of your senses open, sarvadvarani, samyam, they're not going to be in your control, samyam, then, and your man is not going to be centered, then how can you reach my home? You're going to be scattered. You're going to go down this street and that street and lose your way. No road map. And dashing about here and there, and one fine day, time to leave the world. Think. So 12th verse, Sarvadvarani Samyamya, control, hold on. Hold your horses, find your direction, set your GPS, that is your positioning system, and then start your journey. Number 13, he said, Omityekaksharam Brahma Vyaharan Mamanusmaran. Utter the symbol Om, and that is a universal sound, because that is the sound which is reverberating in the entire universe after the Big Bang, because there is no there is no resistance in space, there is a vacuum, and because there is vacuum, the first sound of the Big Bang of the universe coming into creation is reverberating as Om. Believe me, the researchers and scientists have confirmed this fact. And you may believe this or not, but there is those children who have been chanting Om Bhur Bhuva Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodayat. Only 24 syllables. They are the ones who have shown a very distinct cognitive development in their work, cognitive, intellectual. Who found this? The researchers in the West. And today you will find in Scotland and Wales and England, there are many schools where there is Sanskrit chanting being taught. And I'm sure you've seen many videos with regard to that. But many of our own children, they wouldn't know about these chants. They are not chanted in our schools. Okay. The reason for that is varied, and that lies embedded in politics. So I won't go into that. So what is the direct path now? See, Om is a symbol, the mantra is a symbol, everything is a symbol. And I'm using these symbols, like visiting my old album to see my old relatives and my friends, and to say, acha, they look like this. I need a reminder. And therefore I visit the old photo albums. Now Om and everything is a symbol. What is the direct path? Number 22. Purushah saparah partha bhaktya labhyastva vananyaya yasyantasthani bhutani yena sarvamidam tatam. Purushah saparah partha bhaktya labhyasva vanyaya yasyantasthani bhutani yena sarvamidam tatam. That highest Purusha, that highest spirit, is attainable only by unswerving devotion. Now, if we are skeptical about it, and if we make it a part-time activity, just like Chinmayaji said, that once in a way we lead our lives in a materialistic way, once in a way visit the temple and offer prayers and pray to the Lord. And so he is saying, is this DDT? Is this some kind of pest control that you are spraying onto your activities, onto your actions and coming out of the temple? No, it's not pest control spray, your prayer. Your prayer has to be a constant thought. Your devotion is embedded in your heart. So it pervades your being, your life. So that single-pointed devotion, how does it come? We don't have to be taught that. You can ask any young man now he may not have it, any young man who had that one thought in his mind, I want to get married. Suppose, or the young woman who wanted to get married. For that period of time, okay, whatever period, 3 months, 6 months, for that period of time, just see the quality of the mind. It was a single pointed aspiration. I want to get married. And then all the activities were centered around that. So this is just an example. It could be the people who want to seek a job abroad. Then it becomes a single pointed obsessive effort towards that. Okay, so it's not like human beings don't know what single pointed devotion is. Yes, of course they know. They have been using it for the worldly acquisitions. Yo yo yam yam tanum bhaktah. आप जिसकी पूजा करेंगे वही भगवान आपको फल देंगे. Small gods, smaller gods of not the ultimate, but the smaller gods. Yo yo yam yam. So ananya, attainable. So it is attainable if your attention is first withdrawn from something and then focused on something else. So for example, this person who wanted to have a job in a multinational company in a Western country, and he had to work very hard. He gave up so many things. He pulled his mind out of all his socializing and drinking and wasting of time in media for that period of time. He pulled out. We have to pull out of something and prioritize and say, oh, life will go on. Everything will go on actually. Life and husband and hot chapatis for husband, if that is what is the priority, or whatever. I don't know really what our priority is, pulling us back and back and back into the sansar all the time. What are our priorities? That only we can chalk out. Nobody else can know. Bhagwan is saying, shorten that list and make this your highest priority. And if it is important for you, you will aim for it. Just like it was important for me to gain that multinational job, so I aimed for it. And what was not so important, I threw it like shiny shingles on the beach. Okay, this is not important. Maybe the young man said, I don't want to hobnob with this crowd of people who are just drinking Friday nights and not getting anywhere. I'm focused on my job. He did that. So the quality of bhaktya, ananya bhakti is the word used in this verse. We do know of it, but not for the universe, not for the ultimate purpose. Sarvamidam tatam, that universe, what is universal already pervades you. So this is just a gentle reminder from Bhagwan. He's sending more and more WhatsApp messages. Who? Bhagwan. In shloka after shloka, after every 10 shlokas or something, he will say Ananya Bhakti, gentle reminder, please remember that what is your goal, come back to it. And all the sansari things are taken care of. Once they are taken care of, don't have to chase it over and over or let it dwell in the mind. But when we are engrossed so neck deep in this world, do you know how hard it is for us to even distinguish between what is important and what is not? So what we say is, what are the flimsy things which are dwelling on my mind? So the flimsy things which are dwelling on my mind are, okay, I got a new project, wow, excitement. Okay, but let it not occupy so much space. Good, drop it from the mind now. Flimsy. My house is too small, now I need to do something, but no, it's too small. And compared to the neighbors, my balcony just doesn't have that sunlight. And compared to the other neighbors, I just don't have an additional balcony. My house is too small. It is becoming an obsessive cycle of thoughts. Flimsy thought. My neighbor himself is obnoxious. Every time I'm playing chanting music, he comes banging at the door and he says, tone down the volume. Maybe he doesn't like it, that's okay. But my neighbor is obnoxious is a theme which is playing in my mind and creating more noise. You say, oh, what a rogue my neighbor is. That noise in your head is the destructible part, is the destructive element, not the neighbor, because everything outside in the world is not in our control. So, flimsy. What kind of neighbors I have? Flimsy thought, drop it. What kind of wealth I have? Flimsy thought, hold it and then drop it. What kind of a dress I want for the next event? Okay, figure it out, drop it. I was praised a lot for the charity work I had done in such and such a year, and that praise is still ringing in my ears. Drop it, flimsy thought. So praise and blame and hate and love, that raga dvesha as they call it, and distaste, likes and dislikes, flimsy thought. When it comes, experience it, drop it. Oh, what's flimsy we don't understand. That's why we say, no, I'm just living in the world, but I don't know how I lose the entire day without having enough time for meditation and for reading two shlokas from any scripture. Why? Why is the time not created? Because my mind is filled. Oh, I got that compliment. Somebody said, oh, what lovely hair you have. Okay, flimsy thought. Accept it. Drop it again. What are the serious things which need attention? Serious things kaun si hain? You know something? The other day I went out and I found that when I was driving, somebody cut my car very badly at the signal. And he cut me in, and I nearly banged into that guy. He cut in so sharply, and then he raced off. And I was in a fit of rage. And I honked after him and I cursed in my car. Of course, he can't hear my curses. And I was in a fit of anger. Okay. Alarm bells, serious. This needs serious attention. Don't drop it. Serious attention is what makes me lose my temper. Hold my temper. Okay. Now, I have been told many times that the situation that is shaping up in Indian politics, we are discouraged from buying Chinese goods. Okay, no problem. But I'm so tempted during Deepavali to decorate my house because I want the best I want my balcony to have the best sparklers and sparkling lights, and I want people to appreciate it, and I want it to be dazzling and beautiful. I want. So what do? I just sideline that little directive which has been given to me by the government. It's a small example that discourage Chinese goods, but I still buy those streamers and those light strings. Why? And you know we are doing it. Why? Because serious needs attention here. Alarm bells. Attention is what? That when we have every day, every moment, we have a choice between two things: Shreyas and Preyas. This comes in Kathopanishad, the two words. Preyas is what I love to do, what gives me pleasure. I choose that, Preyas. Shreyas is life will always give you the other choice. The second choice is always given to you to say, but what is right? What is right? Are you choosing that? Because every situation has a right and a wrong, and a pleasurable and a non-pleasurable. But are we choosing the prayers, the pleasurable over the righteous action? What is righteous? Every situation we have a choice. Shreyas and prayers we are not choosing. It's the same. It's a very small example with use of plastics in our garbage bins. We want the plastic liners, and we are told it's destroying the earth. Protect your earth. The earth cannot take the burden of more plastic. But we say it's just my garbage bin. It's such a pain not to have a clean garbage liner. I need a plastic liner. Oh, it's okay. So I go to the traffic signal, and when someone is selling those garbage liners, which are actually prohibited, they're wrong, we've been told they're bad for the environment, for the economy, our children will inherit an earth which is unbreathable. No. I put all these thoughts at the back, because the predominant thought in my mind is prayers, what gives me comfort and what is the most convenient for me, I do it first. Now, if our own convenience and our own pleasure and our own comfort predominates, then it needs serious attention. Then serious attention. Another example, the moment we say, I like this food and I dislike that food, and I like my pizza topping just so, with just that kind of sprinkling, and I like my hamburger with just that kind of sauce and this kind of flavoring. Why are we describing the gross world with such intensity? It does not require that kind of intense attention we are giving to the gross world. Arey Baba, your like and dislike of your food and your preferences in your clothing and your food and your friends, be careful, satsang is important. So again, alarm bells, serious thought needed here. Are we choosing the right things to talk about? My likes and my dislikes, my rag and my dvesh are dragging me back and back into my into this body of senses, my sensory world. That's why Bhagwan says Sarva Dwarani Samyamya. Keep the body of all the gates of the senses in equilibrium. Sarva Dwarani Samyamya, in equilibrium. How can it be in equilibrium if all the time my mind is on who is good, my neighbor is bad, my food is not just the right temperature, I like my tea just that right way? Who cares? God certainly doesn't care whether the gross world is pleasing us or displeasing us. But yes, we are doing ourselves a great deal of disservice by moving away from the spiritual path into the world of matter. And japa and dhyan, when I have a choice between japa and dhyan, and I choose a nice new movie which has been released, and I'm really tempted, especially by this new movie, not new, it's an old one, but I'm tempted to see it. It's called Victoria and Abdul, a true story about Queen Victoria and the manservant Abdul from Agra, India, whom she took a great liking to, and turns out to be a true story. I am so tempted in the evening, but 7 o'clock is my time for jap and prayer. What do I choose? That depends. How are you prioritizing? Depends. So this struggle between the rag and the dvesh, the likes and the dislikes, the shreyas and the prayers, the righteous and the pleasurable is constant. It's every day, it's every moment. But if you're not aware of it, it needs serious attention. Attention, please, says Bhagwan. But where is my attention? My mind is too busy to even hear the alarm bells of Krishna. Why? Because my mind is so busy regurgitating that nice compliment I got the other day. Someone praised me, someone hurt me, someone discouraged me, another person actually insulted me. All that is in my mind already. In that noise, I cannot hear the gentle prodding of Krishna. Krishna is so gently, so compassionately prodding and explaining verse by verse, right through Gita. But no, my mind is on something else. So, if spirituality is my weak subject, what do I do? What did I do in school? In school, if math was my weak subject, I gave extra time to mathematics by going for tuition. But if spirituality is my weak subject in my life, I don't give it extra time, I give it less time. So I'm bound to fail. So that's how it goes. So there are two ways in which we can depart from this world: extroverted and extravagant, or inward looking. We are going to see this tomorrow. There are two ways in which we can depart from the world. So